Welcome back to the Commerce Collective, a podcast brought to you by Flywheel. You're listening to This Month Above the Fold, a monthly series on the Commerce Collective feed where Patrick Miller, co-founder of Flywheel, covers the most important e-commerce topics each month, and this is your September 2024 episode. My name is Emma Irwin, and I'm a brand marketing manager at Flywheel and the host of this podcast. This month's episode is a little bit different because we're going to deep dive on one specific topic, and that is determinism versus probabilism. We wanted to send you into October, into the upcoming holiday season, thoroughly educated on an important element of advertising measurement that further helps you understand what we mean when we talk about measuring things in a deterministic manner and why that actually matters. You've met Patrick so many times, so no need for a formal intro there. We're just going to get straight into it. Okay, so Patrick, at Flywheel, we talk all about that we're on this mission to be able to tie marketing efforts to sales outcomes in a deterministic manner via the data that we in Omnicom have. But what in the heck does in a deterministic manner mean? Can you tell me about, from this broad view, what determinism versus probabilism actually means and why people in the advertising industry should be well versed in this topic?
So the way I think about it, and I'm a little bit of a country mouse here, but is the idea of for determinism, it is me, Patrick, sees ad and ad company then knows that Patrick went and did something, i.e. bought chicken on Instacart. And that is tied back to me, the individual human, typically through something, like a customer ID or potentially, like an email. Versus probabilism is, okay, me, chicken company, I put up a billboard on I-95 going into Baltimore and talks about how great my chicken is. And then I say, well, did it work or not? And so you're like, well, I don't know. And so I don't know, there's no way to tell that Patrick saw the, the billboard and then went and bought chicken. But then I can then look and see sort of what happens to my sales around there. And, I can then do a regression model or whatever to then say, oh, well, the sales went up, the action went in the right direction or the wrong direction. And so probabilistically, hey, that thing worked. And so what they're both trying to do is solve for efficacy of advertising, but coming from it from sort of two different ways.
I see. I'm thinking, when we use the example of looking at a billboard and driving past a billboard and not really necessarily being able to tie that back to an outcome very specifically, but I feel like there's still a ton of probabilism in the digital sphere as well.
Oh, a ton.
Can you walk through a scenario that's not a billboard?
Yeah. Right. So just like linear television. So if I'm watching TV, if I'm watching the Olympics, not on Peacock, but I'm sure you can still get them over the air, hey, how do you know that thing worked? So that would be, sort of probabilistic approach. And you'll hear a lot of brands talk about, sort of something like a marketing mix model, which is, again, looking at, sort of using really advanced regression and taking into account. And it's not just looking at the ads, but also price, promotion, the 4 Ps, is the product in stock, et cetera, to then look across all of them. And the reason that probabilism is so important is because it is not in the economic best interest for many of the walled gardens to play nice with one another. And so, at the end of the day, even though determinism sounds amazing and it's wow, this would be great if it worked, but they don't, Meta, Google, and Amazon and Temu don't always, and TikTok, they don't always play nice with one another. And quite frankly, from a privacy perspective, I don't know if I want my customer ID or my email address floating all over the place. And so there's inherent friction. And so you're this idea that I'm going to deterministically be able to measure the internet, great ambition, but it's probably impossible because I just don't ever see all the walled gardens, playing nice.
I see. Where do you see, if you had to predict, striking, I know you hate predictions, but striking some kind of balance in the future, do you think we'll lean more to where, the majority of online advertising can be measured in this deterministic way, or will it always kind of stay more towards the probabilism?
It's an and statement. And so to me, it's not just an either or, it's a both. And so it is figuring out, so one on determinism, figuring out is it really deterministic or not? And so you can see things sometimes we'll advertise on the DSP and there is it serves up an ad to a user that doesn't have a customer ID. And if Google ever kills the cookie, that then compounds a problem that doesn't look like that's going to be a problem now. And so even though I think I'm measuring deterministically, there are times when there is murkiness out there. Or, some one things that we'll run into is like, you always hear like people talk about my phone's listening to me. What that typically is that you have two CIDs that are summed into a household ID. And so what I mean by that is like, so me and my wife are, sitting around, she's doing research for microscopes, and then she's doing that on, whatever, on the web. And then we're talking about microscopes and the pink splotches that she looks at for work that I don't understand what they are. Then the next day I get an ad for a microscope. And I'm like, oh my God, the internet's, snooping on me. Well, in reality, it's like she's like spending time looking up like her nerd stuff. And I'm way more interesting and only looking at interesting things online, like bike races. And then I get served up a Microsoft ID. And so all that's happening though is that we have two CIDs that are then summed into a household ID. And it is then saying, oh, I'm going to serve up ads to both of them. And so this is a challenge when you sometimes look at, you think it is happening on a one-to-one basis and it's not, and there's murkiness. It's the same thing that happens when you're like, on what vector do you match? Do you match on, on email address? Do you match on physical address? Do you match on, phone number? All of these have some murkiness to them. And so even if we think it is perfect determinism, it's not necessarily always perfect.
Why is that the first time I've heard of two CIDs in one house just being combined into one, and that's why my phone is listening to me?
I don't know.
How have I made it this long without...
I was really proud that I didn't just do CID and HHID, and I actually said the acronym. But yeah, so it's like things like that where it's just like, and I think for folks in the industry, of really diving deep to understand, like, especially when it is, whether it's determinism or probabilism, it's like, well, how's the math done? What assumptions are being done? And in peeling back the onion on any assumptions, that are made, or any, to use the technical term, smushing together. And so, for brands and agencies and tech providers, like, okay, understanding, well, what's actually happening here? And this is one of the reasons I do so like AMC, because Amazon Marketing Cloud allows us to do the queries and we can see, and we're like, okay, well, that worked or that didn't work. And you can see sort of, where there is, when smushing is happening. And then we can then build, the math on top of it and be, highly transparent about any assumptions that are made.
One of my questions was going to be, I feel like I started to hear the word determinism more frequently and in conjunction with like clean rooms more frequently, kind of around the same time. Like, were clean rooms kind of this catalyst for being able to measure in a more deterministic manner?
I mean, for us, it was because it was like, yeah, this is fun. But the reason I started using the language more when we started putting more effort into, AMC, whatever it was, 3 or 4 years ago, is because it was like, for me, it was like searching for language to be specific and explicit about what we're actually doing and why. And so when I take a step back and I think about, hey, what works from an advertising perspective, deterministically, like, and knowing that, like, I have no way to ever know that Patrick saw the chicken billboard, right? Like, that's just never going to happen. And so when we work with a brand who only advertises, sells on Amazon and only advertises on Amazon, it's damn near 100% deterministic. There's a little softness on the edges, but for the most part, it's like, it's perfect and it's simple and it's not easy, but it's pretty damn easy. Like, the only thing you kind of have to solve for is like multi-touch attribution, other than like view versus click, but whatever. Like, for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. The bigger brands, who people know, and people are oftentimes channel shifting, and people are seeing on television, they're seeing on billboards and print, anywhere else they might be advertising, and across walled gardens, it's a whole lot more complicated. And so I look at, in certain ways, like I look at like when I'm on just Amazon or I'm just on Walmart or just on Instacart, like I'm sort of building a terrarium, and it's like perfect and it's contained and I can see all the little things inside of it and how they interact. But I've got like multiple little terrariums. And so it's like, well, how do they? And if the critter jumps from one to the other, it's like, well, how do you see? Like, you can't see. And so that's where you then get into sort of the idea of probabilism. And so I then get to what, as I think about it, especially as now these platforms increasingly are doing more and more upper funnel, which is traditionally much more probabilistic. So, Walmart goes and buys Vizio, Amazon has everything with Prime Video. Well, how do I bridge the two? And how do we think through, like, okay, well, maybe I can measure deterministically upper funnel all the way down to lower funnel within this one ecosystem. But oh, by the way, I know that people are not just watching Prime Video, they're watching these other things. So it has to be an and statement. And it's like a question of, well, why are you measuring this? And what do you go do with it? And when is this an exercise about sort of finding, reach, and frequency? And when is this an exercise in optimization or targeting or whatever?
I don't normally narrate things in our Above the Fold episodes, but I couldn't help myself here. That was a lot of information, so before we wrap up, I wanted to take a step back and recap what was covered in the last 10 or so minutes. I think a big thing here is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to determinism versus probabilism, and brands can decide on how they choose to measure outcomes, and there isn't necessarily a wrong answer. We're inclined to push for more deterministic measurement because we think it's interesting, but for the sake of people's privacy, we're never going to be able to, with 100% certainty, say what ads worked and what didn't along the customer path to purchase. We can get pretty darn close and closer than we ever have before, but it leaves us with, hey, if brands choose to look at things probabilistically because they have the frameworks built out for that, so be it. Okay, back to the real thing. All right, I think that was pretty solid coverage for the topic, but let's leave the lights on for a second longer if you have anything additional to say, any closing thoughts. You know how it goes.
I think we too frequently lump all the brands together and we say, hey, that, you all are the same, whether you're, sort of a Chinese seller versus a big US brand. And I increasingly think it's important to separate them sort of where they are in the life cycle. And by that, I mean, sort of where are the points of distribution that they have and what is the, their household penetration. And so to me, like sort of the other side of this, and the reason I really care about this is the shittiness of the supply chain and just how many times where it's just like, whether it's like the made for advertising stuff, whether it is just junk inventory or who knows who's got their fingers in the pot along the way. And so like what determinism really allows us to do is to figure out that supply path and where are all the costs in it, and then push and try to figure out, hey, what's a better way? Getting back to brands for a second though, when I think about like high household penetration brands, I don't know if targeting is worth it for them on a probabilistic perspective, because really, like if you're, selling a chocolate bar, like your target's everybody, same thing with something, toilet paper, paper towels or whatever. And so why would I want to pay for targeting if all I care about is cost per unique reach, unless I can prove out on a unit level that the targeting is worthwhile, and deterministically I can say, hey, I put, a nickel into the machine and look, all these quarters spit out, and I can prove it down to a one-to-one basis. And so kind of pulling those all together, again, it's like, it's a sum of both, and it's not an either or, it's not sort of a religion conversation. It's using all the tools in the shed to best achieve what you want.
All right. I think that really wraps us up. But Patrick, something that I've been wondering, we haven't talked about this in forever, but we've been doing these episodes forever and ever, and we haven't heard what's on your digital wish list in like years at this point. So can you tell me something on your digital wish list that just lives in your cart forever that you don't actually purchase, and why?
I don't know. Well, books more than anything else. Like I keep like books I haven't, like I have like guilt about books that I haven't read. And so I have Ulysses that, love of God, like I've been slugging at this thing and I'm going to finish it in the next 2 months. And so, but then once I get that, and I got this other book over there I got to do. And then once those are done, I then have like a list of books, but I don't want to buy the books until I finish the other books. So, but summer, I just haven't been doing much reading. So now I'm getting ready to start again.
That's fair. The temperature gets colder. There's less time outside, more time to read your books.
Dark. Yeah. What else are you going to do?
What else are you going to do? Cozy little fireplace and a light. We love it.
Exactly. So yeah, so it's probably books more than anything. I just have a list of books that I want to get to, but I just haven't. So, and it's like decades in the making. So yeah, Ulysses, I first time took a crack at that in high school and failed miserably, but it was one of my New Year's resolutions to get through it this year. And just, out of my good friend Scott Collins sent me a copy of it, and I'm going to not disappoint him.
I see. On the note of failing miserably, I'm reminded of trying to read War and Peace and myself failing miserably. The last time we talked about this, you were talking about trying to finish War and Peace. Did you ever get there?
I didn't get through it. I
Patrick.
just looking at it. It's that's another story. I know.
I've tried that one. I failed.
Yeah.
I think within like 50 pages I failed, and I was
I'm going to go that. I own that one. I'm going to go back to it.
Heck yeah. We'll get there someday.
Yeah.
And with that, that's it for this month's e-commerce news. Tune into next month's episodes for the latest and greatest everything you need to know about what's topical in e-commerce. I'm Emma Irwin, and we'll see you next time.